Welcome back to Major Intonio's presentation of 13 Days, The Chronicle of an Escape from a German Prison, by John Caunter. Chapter 13, Across the Frontier.
During our rapid march, we passed a few houses, and shortly afterwards began to cross an open moor, which spread flat and wide in front of us. Our map showed a canal bordering the frontier itself, and it was along this canal that we anticipated having to avoid the line of actual frontier watchers. We were desperately anxious to make the frontier line within the next half hour in order to avoid having to lie waiting for the next night within a mile or so of it, as so many unfortunate escaped prisoners have been caught while hiding near the frontier itself. This anxiety on our part was now the cause of our making an appalling error, which nearly ended disastrously for us both. When within a mile of a line of trees, which we decided must be along the canal bank and must practically define the frontier line, we suddenly saw 2 German soldiers advancing some 1,000 yards in front of us. Had they seen us? We dived to the ground and lay still in the hope that we had not been seen. Soon there was no doubt whatever that we had been observed, as the 2 Boers came straight towards us at a steady walk. We decided that by separating one or both of us might succeed in getting away from them, and so I crawled towards the north, while Fox went off southwards towards a peat observation hut. Fox was dressed in his dark blue suit still, and I had now got my khaki coat as my outside garment. The value of the khaki coat now came out. They evidently saw Fox crawling and not me, as they very soon changed their direction slightly in order to go after him. Fox and I had crawled 200 yards apart when he must have had no doubt that they were definitely after him, and I suddenly saw him get up and run off away from the frontier direction. He seemed to me to be keeping the hut between him and his German pursuers. The latter, probably oldish men, or wounded and not absolutely recovered, had no idea of running after him, and I suppose they knew that their shooting was not good enough to score a hit at a running man 400 yards from them. However, they followed his course at a brisk walk, passing me at some 100 to 200 yards distance. I saw them go to the hut, look in, and not finding anything in it of interest to them, continue their pursuit. Fox led them over the worst pieces of boggy ground he could find. Having no boots and very light footwear, by reason of the 2 pairs of socks being his all, he was able to do excellent time over the peaty soil. The Germans got others to help them, and eventually had quite a number of Boers after him. Finding a hole in the ground which satisfied his requirements, Fox got into it and covered himself over with peat and heather. The field now included dogs and cyclists. When the dogs had got sufficiently near him to cause real alarm, a marvelous stroke of luck came to his assistance. A flock of sheep, grazing on the moor, wandered right across his track, drowning all scent and completely defeating all the efforts of the dogs to follow his line. After lying shivering in his hole all day, he commenced his final dash for the frontier at about 11 p.m. and crossed a mile or so to the north of the place at which I passed through the German frontier line without seeing any sentries. After the Germans had gone well past me in their hunt after Fox, I began to crawl again, but I made slow progress, as going on all fours was out of the question, the vegetation being seldom more than 18 inches high and in places considerably less. It was a most tiring game, this sort of land swimming, and I continued as long as I could each time I did a crawl, and then rested a space. In 3 hours, I covered 500 yards, and then considered that I was far enough from the scene of our discovery to be safe. Should the Germans return to see if anything of interest had been left at the place where they had first remarked Fox crawling. I then lay still and began to feel fearfully cold on account of the soaking wet clothes clinging to me. I had a meager meal. I had no water, so soon began to feel thirsty as the day began to warm up. Sleep was out of the question, firstly on account of the cold, and afterwards on account of the great heat when the sun got high. I lay and thought of many things, mostly of that line of trees I could see ahead of me, which I knew must be practically along the frontier line. The fear of recapture now became haunting. Up till then, I had been fully prepared to find myself rounded up and then taken back to 5 months' solitary confinement, and I had managed to think of that probability with complete calm, as so few of the many who try to escape have the luck to get right through with it. But now it was different. To be so near and know that 12 or 14 hours of inactivity lay in front of one before the last great effort could be attempted, in which time one was powerless to move in the midst of this frontier zone, was a nerve-shattering experience. It would have been much better with a companion, as a whispered exchange of thoughts makes all the difference. I wondered whether Fox had been caught and whether either of us would get over, but never dreamt that we should both have the marvelous luck to do so. While lying there waiting for night, good luck again came to my assistance. The German relief for their posts actually on the frontier marched across this open moor every 2 hours, and they passed along a track within 200 yards of my hiding place so that I could time their passing and was able to make plans accordingly. They passed me regularly at 5:30, 7:30, 9:30, etc., and those that were relieved and had to return across the moor generally came by about 3/4 of an hour afterwards. I was also able to watch them until they disappeared every time in a clump of bushes under the trees I had already noticed and conjectured must be along the frontier. Thus, I could fairly well assume that the position of one post was fixed. The afternoon wore on, and I managed to pass some of the time by drying the compass, which had got full of water during the previous night's swim. With the exception of the regular passings of the boat's sentry relief, the only other human being who showed himself was a shepherd, some 500 yards away. I had an anxious time for a spell as he drove his sheep towards me, and I feared that if they came past me, the dog might give me away. Fortunately, he turned the flock homewards when still some 300 yards from me. Evening slowly came, and the long hours of twilight gradually gave way to partial darkness. I cannot call it a stronger darkness than that, as the moon rose at once, and the north never lost its weird light all night. I felt the want of sleep badly, but had not been able to sleep for even 1/4 of an hour all day, and now could not run the risk of waking too late, so had to do without it. At 10:30, I came to the conclusion that I could move at last, and very pleased I was to stand up and rub my legs after my enforced uncomfortable position all day. Setting out cautiously towards the frontier post that I had been able to more or less mark down, it was not very long before the mile or so of open that had to be covered was completed. I thought that, were I to pass close to the post of which I knew the position, I must necessarily be as far from the unknown one on my right as possible. At about 200 yards distance from what I judged to be the line of posts, I got on all fours and worked forward noiselessly. My khaki coat again stood me in good stead, as I must have been an extremely difficult object to see, even in the light which was at that time quite strong. Once more, my luck held good. When about midway between the posts, the Boek sentry on duty on my right, about whom I knew nothing, very obligingly chose that moment to stand up against the skyline and begin singing Die Wacht am Rhein. It was a fine night, which perhaps caused him to be jovial, but probably it was the result of smuggled spirits. After singing a bit, my friend the sentry began shouting to his companion next beyond him. This made matters easier for me, and I was able to crawl forward in full confidence. A dike, at the bottom of which was a little water, had to be crossed, and then some rough fields. Shortly after this, I heard a patrol, which I easily avoided in the corn. Several more dikes, the deepest water in any of them only reaching to my knees, had to be crossed, and I was once more on arable land. I must now have been 2 miles inside Holland, but now again I heard a patrol. This time a cyclist dashed along the road on hearing me, I suppose, and once again the same curlew noises began to spread themselves around me. However, this time I knew about them and pushed on extremely rapidly, cutting across country and keeping to the cornfields where I knew I should never be followed and be very difficult to catch. I soon left this danger behind, and then struck a pave road and a railway line. The sleepers were wooden, whereas in Germany they are iron. I felt now that I was across, but continued steadily on my way. Seeing a great number of powerful lights in front of me, I made for them, and eventually reached them to find that they belonged to a factory working at top pressure. Around this factory straggled a large village. Tuesday, 3rd July. Here I found no guards and sat down to wait for daylight to show me the language of that village as indicated on the advertisements in the shop windows. I had got in here at 3:30 a.m. and at 4:30 knew that the words in the shop windows were Dutch and not Bosch. What a great feeling of relief and rest it was. The first man I saw was a soldier on a bicycle, to whom I made myself known. He was very quick to find me breakfast at the cottage of a fellow soldier of his. The latter refused all payment and was an excellent fellow. Later, I reported myself to the local policeman, and while talking to him, heard Fox's voice. He had arrived 2 hours after me, after crossing the frontier a mile to the north of where I had passed the line. We were delighted to see each other, but at the time were not so tremendously struck by the fact that we had come together again. Of course, it was an extraordinary thing to happen, really, but we only realized that later. At the moment, we only thought of the fact that we were both safely across and would be home in due course, and that we had had the most marvelous luck that could well have come our way. Fox had covered this distance, roughly 170 miles as we did it, in 12.5 days, and I had taken 13 days and a few hours.
Conclusion.
Breakfast was given us by the Dutch police official who had been our welcomer. They were very kind to us at his house, and we managed to get a small wash, and we attempted to make ourselves look a little more respectable before going on to Rotterdam. It was the first time I had seen a mirror for 14 days, and when I saw what it told me, I got a fright. A filthy, scrubby object met my gaze, and I was not sorry to get a shave that afternoon at the town before proceeding, and we stayed for the night and got baths. We met nothing but kindness here. Arriving at Rotterdam at noon next day, we said goodbye to our Dutch policeman and came under the excellent care of the British consul there. We landed in England after an uneventful voyage. There are a few remarks to be made in conclusion. Our phenomenal luck was the prime factor in making our attempt successful. Without that all-important item, attempt after attempt may be made without anywhere nearly approaching a success. Our officer-prisoners, as a whole, by continuing their numerous and in many cases desperate attempts to escape, are doing a service to the country, and although nominally counted out of all useful work, are doing valuable work, by causing the Germans to employ more guards to watch them than might otherwise be the case. Prisoners are bound to be taken from all armies, and the unfortunates who have to undergo years of captivity should have the sympathy of all thinking persons. I myself feel great sympathy with those Germans who did 200 miles in an open boat in their attempt to regain their country, and whom we brought back to more durance vile. It is hardly sporting on the part of those people who declare that we should deal harshly with Germans who break away from their camp in this country. Fortunately, by agreement with the German government, all heavy punishments for attempted escapes have been removed, so one great pastime of prisoners of war will not cost so dear in future.
This concludes 13 Days, The Chronicle of an Escape from a German Prison, by John Caunter. We hope you've enjoyed this volume. For more military history audiobooks, visit Intonio.net and subscribe to Major Intonio's YouTube channel. Thank you for listening, and so long.